I'm Ray Winstone, and you're listening to Veterans Work, the podcast, a series that explores the skills and talents that make veterans so valuable in business. The podcast grew out of Veterans Work, the UK's leading independent veterans employability campaign. I'm Ray Winstone, and I support Veterans Work.
Hello and welcome to Veterans Work, the podcast. I'm Kate Silverton. In today's episode, we look at the unique skills that make veterans so well placed to contribute to future industries. I'm joined by Andy Mylop, veteran and Veterans and Allies lead at Facebook, Oz Alashe, veteran and CEO and founder of CyberSafe, and Lisa Marr, veteran and leader of the Veterans Employment Transition Support Programme. So maybe we should start by asking each of you, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about your military background and your journey into which organisations you represent today. Lisa, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So I started my aspiration to join the military quite early on. When I was 8 years old, I got my grandmother to take me into the recruiting office, and sadly I was a little bit too young at that age, and my grandmother was too old, as the recruiting sergeant mentioned. But never really wavered. So at 18, I didn't even apply for university, which was probably a little short-sighted, but it worked out. And I went to Sandhurst and I joined the Royal Logistic Corps. So I did 16 years. Transport is my background. Left at my 16-year punching point, having had 2 little children by then, and wasn't prepared to go away with 2 little boys in tow. Went to New Zealand. So that was my first transition, and promptly joined the New Zealand Army. so did 2 years with the New Zealand Defence Force. We actually spent 5 years in New Zealand in total. And then I came back, as a family, we came back to the UK, and I promptly joined the British Army again. And I served another 5 years. So as I say, I'm not a poster girl for transition, having done it twice. And I'm now out officially. My days in green have come to an end, and I now work for Barclays Bank running their Veteran Employment Transition Support Programme.
Wonderful. I kind of think you are a good poster girl for transition. In, out, it's just,
In, out, not sure what I wanted to do. Probably, says a lot for that transitional process, and me just something, taking my time to find out what I actually wanted to do, and I think that's often half the problem.
Yeah, well, we'll delve into that a little deeper if you don't mind. So I think that's quite an interesting, the lessons that you've learned as a result and what you now understand maybe in terms of confidence, as you say, in terms of coming out.
Sure.
So we'll come back to that if you don't mind, but Oz, let's bring you in at this point.
Yeah, so I found out about the military through school, joined the CCF when I was at school, you kind of had to, and loved every second of it. Went to university and joined the OTC, the Officer Training Corps. Totally assumed that being in the military was about drinking and doing things other than being in the military, because that's what you did in the OTC. And so I thought I'd go to Sandhurst because I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity for me to just learn a little bit more about myself, actually, rather than anybody else, and of course also serve. But I didn't come from a military background. I grew up in London, went to school in Hertfordshire, went to university in Berkshire, so kind of all over the place. Didn't really see the value in the county system or the family regimental system at that point, and happened to watch an episode of EastEnders, which some people listening will know what that was. So a really troubled character on stage called Grant Mitchell, gobbing off about his time in the parachute regiment, and thought, I'm going to join the parachute regiment. And so that's literally how I made my decision about what regiment to join. So when I went to Sandhurst, commissioned into the parachute regiment, had a fantastic time, and left after 17 years. And I now run a software company, a cybersecurity company based in Canary Wharf. We've been doing that now for 4 years. We're growing rather quickly. It's absolute chaos. I loved every second of service and enjoying this now.
And so cybersecurity sounds terribly mysterious and
and
very interesting. So how does one make the jump into cybersecurity?
So actually, people go into cybersecurity in lots of different ways. For me, I spent quite a lot of time chasing, trying to understand why unpleasant people were doing what they were doing. This is whilst in the military, and how they were doing it. So what were people doing online in order to access information that they shouldn't have had? I was focused on counterterrorism and national security for 12 of my 17 years. So cybersecurity, a large chunk of that is that. How do people get access to our networks, our systems, and our data, and what can we do to protect ourselves against that? And so we are focused on the human aspect of cybersecurity, and that's what we do at CyberSafe. CyberSafe is a software company that focuses on that. But there are so many ways into cybersecurity, and I suspect we'll talk about lots of other things that veterans are doing in cybersecurity that have nothing to do with the human aspect, maybe more to do with the threat intelligence side, for example.
Okay, well, we will indeed pick up on that, but not before we bring Andy in.
Thanks, Kate. So I suppose similar to Lisa, really, I've been interested in a military career from a very young age, probably 7 or 8. And I had a slightly eccentric uncle who had originally served as a lieutenant colonel in the Indian Army, who loved a gin and tonic and, had lots of stories to tell. So, he was quite a strong influence on my life, I suppose, as I was growing up, particularly early teens. And then my parents had a pretty messy divorce, and I ended up joining the army as a rifleman. So I joined the Royal Green Jackets and served in Northern Ireland, which was definitely an interesting experience in the mid 80s. Still pretty rough being on tour in West Belfast. And after that tour, went back to Germany, carried on serving. In the end, got into a relationship and decided that it was time to leave the army and kind of enter the civilian world. And the relationship didn't work out in the end. And I found myself falling in love with adventure sports, and particularly skydiving. So I'd started sport parachuting in the army, Bad Lippspringer in Germany and Netheravon in the UK. Did an AFF course, accelerated freefall course, just absolutely loved it. And there was something about the community in skydiving that reminded me of the military. Lots of very different people, but quite close knit. And that actually took me then to all around the world, spent some time in the US, ended up going to Australia, then New Zealand, living in New Zealand for, I think, 4 years and working as a professional skydiver at Wanaka. And anyone that knows Wanaka, it's described as like an alpine village, but it's beautiful. It's the 4th largest lake, Mount Spine National Park in the background. And I'd wake up every day and go and jump out of planes and get paid to do it. So it was amazing. But I realised that, it probably wasn't going to be a lifelong career. So loved the time that I had. I started thinking about really what I wanted to do and thought about business and tech. Got in contact with a few universities, came back from New Zealand, went to the University of Portsmouth, studied kind of, I suppose, a mix of business, marketing and technology. Graduated and ended up working for a publishing company. And then to a tech company which was acquired by Google. So I ended up working for Google for a few years and then to Facebook. So I've been very fortunate, to work for 2 very large global technology companies. But it's been an incredible journey.
I'll say, multifaceted to say the least. Do you just follow your heart when you're making, because I can almost hear, if I'm listening, I would be saying, wow, I'd like the skydiving bit, but then tech, how do you get from New Zealand back to making that leap and planning out a career? Because I think that sometimes, and maybe I'll ask all of you this, I imagine there might be that sort of fear of that vacuum that you think, gosh, might open up once I step outside of the military. How do I make sure that I land safely? Coming back to the parachuting.
Yeah.
But yeah, how did have you just followed your heart? What's the secret?
I think I've never been afraid of reinvention. I think that's what it is. I think the army definitely instilled some self-belief, and I've always believed that if you apply yourself to something, if you really apply yourself to something, and you are really passionate about it, you'll make it work. You'll find a way. And I think, that was definitely the case with the skydiving and actually the case with technology and marketing. It was just something that I really enjoyed. And I think for me, it's not being afraid of that reinvention. If you really feel that you can do something, I believe that you can do it.
I love that. I subscribe to that. What about you two?
I think that one of the things that actually often surprises me is quite often when veterans or when service people come to leave, there is a nervousness about stepping into the civilian world, which is slightly amusing sometimes when you think about going the other way, leaving the civilian world and joining the armed forces. I mean, that really is a big leap and a big step. And of course, for some people, they're doing it really at a rather young age. And the truth of the matter is, sometimes early on in our lives, we are more willing to make that change. We're almost more willing to back ourselves to just work it out as we go. But come the other end, maybe the risk is higher, and maybe some of the reasons we feel that nervousness, or some people feel that nervousness, is because of that. And I think that actually, Sanders just suggested, this idea of reinvention is something that is really quite important today, whether it's people in the civilian world just changing jobs every 2 or 3 years. Actually, this idea of reinvention and being comfortable with what one has learnt and building upon that as one moves, I think is something that we just really need to encourage everybody to do, but of course the veteran community as well.
And how do we best do that, Lisa?
Sorry, how do we best
encourage people to embrace reinvention?
I think it's really important that whilst people are serving, they've got to start thinking about their future, because everybody's time will come to an end at some point, whether you see out your engagement, or whether you leave because of family reasons, relationship reasons, whatever that might be, injury even. That there is a finite point in your career when it's time to step out of the green, the light blue, or the navy. And you've got to start thinking about, what am I going to do next? And that's something I didn't do. When I transitioned, I went and did a ski instructor course, not too far from Wanaka, strangely. But, completely useless for, a future career, because I was never going to do that full time. But I didn't know what else. There was an opportunity. I took it, had a great 8 weeks in Queenstown, and, didn't think about the future. And it's really short-sighted. But I also think when I left originally in 2009, transition was a very different beast. And I think it's absolutely progressed hugely in those last few years. And there is a real resurgence of people pushing people who are serving now to start looking much earlier on, rather than just that, you press the 7 buttons of freedom, you've got 2 years to think about it. I think there's a real push, both externally from all of our businesses like ours, but also within the military, to say to people, right, start thinking about your future. What qualifications are you going to do? And start to translate those qualifications. So when they come to that 2-year point, they're almost kind of there, or starting to think about what those transferable skills and how they relate in the real world.
And there's a theme that's come up in the previous podcast, actually, that I've just heard from Andy and Lisa there, is that actually it doesn't, the first job that you take, even if it is an 8-week ski course, doesn't have to be the be all and end all. Sometimes it's just trying things out, not being afraid to try different jobs when you come out. Would that be?
Completely. It's about grasping the opportunities, I think, that present themselves, because you never know where they lead, and that's a classic, me arriving at Barclays, and people who are listening who know me will know I never wanted to work for the bank. Andy's nodding because he's heard this. And I never wanted to work in London. And look where I am. I'm working for a bank and I'm working in London. But, that's because I was short-sighted about what large corporates could offer me and the kind of roles that were within that. So again, it's about listening, it's about speaking to people, utilising the network, and grasping opportunities when they present themselves.
So let's pick up on that sort of short-sightedness, if we can put it in the nicest possible way, because Oz, you would say that veterans are uniquely placed to enter the tech sector, but in previous podcasts I've been discussing that there might be a reticence of people, tech, that doesn't suit me, doesn't, my skills don't apply there, but you would say otherwise.
I would do, and I would do for a number of reasons, not least of which because, a little bit like often people from outside the military do with the military, I think some veterans will look at the tech sector and discount it on the basis of assumption. I assume that you need to be really quite technical to go and work in the tech sector, for example, and I'm not a technical person, might be something that somebody was saying, as opposed to thinking, actually the tech sector is a sector, and within it there are all sorts of jobs. So of course there are some really rather technical roles, people who are building incredible technology, but there are also people out there selling it. There are also people product managing it, i.e. literally working out what does the customer need, what does that problem look like, how do I break that down into something that can be built, and then how do I make sure that what built actually solves the problem we went out for in the first place. There's so much in the tech sector, and the reason I suggest that veterans are uniquely placed, which I guess some people would probably disagree with, understandably, but the reason I suggest that is the tech sector is moving so fast. It really does attract people who can imagine the future, see very few barriers to getting there, and back themselves to make the changes necessary to make something special happen. Most veterans I know, in one way, shape or form, fall into that category.
You're nodding, Andy.
I really agree with with Oz, because if I think about Facebook, a lot of people would probably assume, well, a lot of jobs are in engineering, which they are. But then you start to think about, the company, and, I start to think about all the roles that veterans are actually employed in. And that ranges from marketing to product management to finance to compliance to physical security to cyber security. So actually, yes, of course, engineering is a key role and a key element of the workforce within a technology company, but there are lots of other opportunities that I think are probably not completely understood by many people that are leaving perhaps the armed forces, that it's not just about engineering, there are lots of other opportunities.
And is the onus on companies like Facebook or yours or Barclays, is the onus on the employer to reach out and say, this is what we're looking for? I mean, where is there a disconnect, or do you think it's getting better in terms of how veterans are perceived and the skills that they bring to the workplace?
I think it's definitely improving. As I said, when I left in 2009, I wasn't aware of any of the companies running programs like vets, like Facebook have, Amazon have their internships, and lots of companies are doing brilliant work, in this space. I mean, Deloitte running these veterans work films, it does so much to push the messaging out there, but it can't just all be one way. It's the veteran who is looking for work. The veterans have to do their own due diligence and look for work, just like everybody else has to do when they're changing jobs. So you can probably tell I feel really strongly about this. It's absolutely got to be, both sides. And I think business has moved an awfully long way. As I say, there's some fantastic opportunities and opportunities to get into business that I don't think any other sector has. I don't know of any other workplace. The police don't get CTP and help in transitioning, the ambulance service don't. We are uniquely positioned where we get so much help, not only as we're transitioning out, but also companies running bespoke packages, especially for military personnel and actually spouses now, which is a huge thing. But the veterans have to do their own due diligence, and so it's hard work finding a job.
So where are the barriers, if there are any?
I guess it probably depends on what we're talking about. So barriers to what? In some cases, if it's barriers to opportunity, for example, how do I get a job at Facebook, for example, that a veteran might be asking themselves today. And in some cases, let's be really honest, it's really quite hard to see yourself doing something or find yourself into a particular environment if you don't know or have seen people like you who've done that before. There's so many examples within society where that's the case. So in that case, you might suggest that the barriers are maybe organisations making it really clear that there are people like you who are working here. We really value that, people with your skills. So that might be one set of barriers. Another set of barriers, though, rather than just to opportunity, might be to understanding. How much do people actually understand about what's out there? There'll be people discounting working in cybersecurity, even though they really, really shouldn't be. If you were an intelligence analyst in the military right now, your skill set is highly sought after within the cybersecurity community, regardless of which service, regardless of what rank, regardless of how long you've done it for. So I think there's just different types of barriers that we're aiming to try and, I guess, overcome. And I agree, I don't believe it's just about employers or indeed even the military addressing this. I think individuals need to take responsibility. What do you want to do? What do you want to spend your time doing? Not the job, not the industry. What kind of work do you like? What makes you happy? Once we start to dig into those types of things, then we start to peel away well, actually, I really like leading. I was a lance corporal or an able seaman, or I was a first class SAC, and I really like leading. Great. Okay. How do we get you into something that focuses on majors on that?
Do we need like an app to matchmake in that regard? I don't mean that to sound simplistic,
No.
but I do. When you say it, it's like, of course that. But I can also hear someone saying, "Oh, but I still don't know." So it's like, how can we close that gap? I mean, is there I know there's lots, because we've spoken to lots of people throughout the series, but I still get the sense that it's not quite as cut and dried as maybe it could be. Andy,
I think one of the big challenges is, actually it's a good point that Oz makes, if I take Facebook for example, do the recruitment teams have an understanding of what veterans or service leavers or spouses bring to the organisation? That's the first thing. So how can we kind of demystify the fact that veterans, service leavers, spouses, they come in different shapes and sizes. So that's one thing. And then I think that, the second part to it is, how do we help them understand the skills and experiences and the qualifications that are gained in service, and map those to the skills that are required to be able to perform a specific role. So, to give you an example, it might be a military policeman, for example, that has investigation skills, that could come in and work within, some form of compliance role, for example. So that there are definitely roles that fit, to skills and experiences that were gained in service. But I think we need, to your point, Kate, we need to do a better job of kind of demystifying, probably on both sides, and then helping to better matchmake.
Is there anything that you would do within Facebook in that regard?
So we have just launched what we're calling a skills translator, and that originated actually in the US. So I think in the US, nearly 2% of the workforce are classified as veterans, which is great. We've got to make up some ground in the UK, but this idea of a skills translator was founded there, and then we've developed it now for the UK. But the idea is that external applicants can use it, and secondly, the recruitment teams can use it to say, okay, now I understand, if there was a captain or a colour sergeant, working in this type of job, doing this type of thing with these kind of qualifications, I can now map those to a role within Facebook.
Fantastic. So that's just launched, is it?
That's just launched, yeah. I think we had a presentation recently at the Officers Association, and we're just in the process now of really, I suppose, making that public, so we can actually get people using it and internally educating our recruitment teams in how to use it, and obviously to support them. I think the other thing, again, it was a great point by Oz, how do we bring the veterans that are working within our organisations and make them accessible? Because I think I'd said to you, Kate, before, and if you'd said to me years ago, would you work for Google or Facebook? I would have said absolutely not. I suppose didn't even know that Facebook would actually come to exist. But the interesting thing, is that you don't know what you don't know, right? It's I think a lot of people, it comes back to that point. They probably think, well, there just aren't roles that are relevant to me and relevant to my experiences, but that isn't the case.
So what is it about each of your jobs that might be potentially attractive to a veteran who's listening right now? What would you say about your specific roles and the companies that you work within?
Well, the current role I'm doing is I run the Veteran Employment Transition Support, VETS for short, programme. So my role is all about assisting the military community, exactly as we're saying, being able to articulate what their transferable skills are, finding out about companies. We've got 180 partners from across all sectors who are all within that, Kate, to help the military community make that transition and hopefully land the right job first time round. So it's a fantastic opportunity for me to give something back to the military community. Now I've finally transitioned and jumped through those hoops and can absolutely understand what people are facing, what they're feeling as they're going through that transition. And it's, as you said, there's often a vacuum because you just don't know what you want to do. And the beauty of having that network of all those sectors is we can get people to speak to individuals within those sectors, so they can speak to somebody like us and find out what actually does it mean to be in cybersecurity, what actually does it mean to be in Facebook, and get that insider knowledge from someone who has travelled that journey, before them. And there's lots of volunteers, lots of mentors on the platform who are just there to help those make that transition. And I think it's just a fabulous programme that is just all about assisting that community finding the right roles within the right sector. And you'll hear time and time again, it's about the network, tapping into that network, so hopefully you can land in the right place.
So, or speaking as somebody who's founded a company and is working within the sector itself, because someone might actually want to found their own company who's listening.
Yeah, well, I think that is absolutely not something that everybody will do, but there'll be many people listening who actually they've seen a problem that they think they can solve, or they think they understand, and they believe there's a solution out there, and they're willing to work towards delivering against that and making a business out of it. And for those lunatics out there, then I would absolutely encourage them to chase that. But do so with their eyes wide open, as you've just heard, whether you're going into a bank or whether you're setting up a software company and going to go through all of the fun and joys of growing that, really connecting with people outside of your circles, which in my particular case means people outside of the military circle as well, who've done this before,
Absolutely,
really learning from them, I would think is a really key thing that I would highlight up front. But I would suggest, why would somebody do certainly what I'm doing right now? It's an incredible opportunity to serve. We're focused on fundamentally transforming society by ensuring that we understand the human aspect of cybersecurity. Every single person who's listening to this is increasingly digitized, increasingly connected. We are increasingly interdependent on each other. We get to build the future. But better than that, I get to build a future knowing that I don't know half, if not a fraction of what I need to know. So I've got to do it surrounded by the most remarkable people. So I get to build a team. I have to build the right team. I have to attract people to a vision so that they truly see the time they spend with CyberSafe as the best way they could possibly spend their time. And then on top of that, I've got to encourage somebody to trust me, to let me solve the problem for them. And it goes on, and it goes on. And it's such an exciting journey. And of course, one that, and anybody in the military will know, there's very little that's worthwhile that you can do on your own. So if you want to surround yourself with really great people, do just that. Just do it in your next phase of life.
You can still have that family that you spoke about, Andy, before, which you found so important. Do you find that where you're working now?
For me, it's like life. It's about lifelong learning. So you never stop learning. And, for me, the pleasure in kind of working for a company like Facebook is the fact that, again, things are moving at a million miles an hour in technology. So, you can never call yourself an expert because, you never will be an expert. But I think lots of different people, learning from different people, being inspired by, their experiences and the work that they're doing, and being able to help other communities, within the company and externally, that's really rewarding. So I enjoy that.
So Lisa, as we look at that ever-changing landscape, what do you think employers will be looking to in terms of the future and what skills they're going to need from their workforce?
Well, I think a lot of what we've learned over the last 40 months is that actually what does the new normal look like in the workplace? And we're moving ever more to a dynamic, flexible workforce where often, individuals are going to find themselves working from home and not necessarily surrounded by their team. So, those skill sets of being resilient, we've all learned that actually it's not that easy to work at home on your own over the last 40 months. That's hard, but, we have that resilience. We've often found ourselves, across the veteran community working in places which, often are not very nice places. We have that mindset, we have that strength of mind and persistence to get a job done. And I think that plays really nicely into that ever more, distancing from the office, having to, take ownership and take responsibility for your actions and maintain your productivity, which, as we know, across the news, people have found that really difficult. And certainly that's when businesses have looked to the veteran community for their resilience, to take leadership positions, to try and drive that teamwork ethos when you've got a very disparate team. But, it's in a lot of our backgrounds. When we deploy, we're not always together. And, and how do you compute your wish and your desire and your mission, to people who are often the other ends of countries with very poor communications, and if we can do it in those circumstances, we can certainly do it here when we've got stable Wi-Fi and you're sat at home with all your home comforts. So I think I don't think there's ever been a better time really for veterans to be able to showcase what they can bring to the workforce.
Awesome.
This really does talk to the what is the future of work and the question around what that means for us moving forward. And there's a huge part of that which is about the physical. Where do people work from? How do people work? What do they is expected of us? And I think the veteran community really does have a lot to bring there. Lisa's just touched on a few of those things. The ability to communicate in pretty uncertain circumstances, and that uncertainty might be bad Wi-Fi, but that uncertainty might simply be with different types of people I've never met before, people I haven't spent time with, new members of the team who aren't necessarily as experienced as others. All of that type of stuff the veteran community can do really well. But for me, this idea of the future of work, I'm quite excited about looking a little bit deeper than that. What type of work will we be doing? Productivity at the moment is so often measured in time and how much effort people are putting in, as opposed to what effect are they actually delivering. And the veteran community really does understand effects. Start at the end and work backwards, we always used to say. What are you trying to achieve and work backwards? And then work out what the things are to measure. The future of work is about people who can do that really quickly. So whether it's because you're trying to build something, deliver a service, understand something and communicate it to other people, start at the end and work backwards. The future of work is about people who find that really, really easy to do, or indeed as easy to do as possible. And the veteran community, I would suggest, should be well placed, because whether you're a driver, a chef, intelligence operator, a rifleman, a sailor, start at the end and work backwards is probably something you've done quite a lot of. That's the future of work for me.
So I think if I think about the future of work, I think adaptability is going to be absolutely critical. Our lives are becoming more digitalized. We know that the technology industry is going to continue to be a major employer going forward. And I think, adaptability, the ability to learn new skills, being inquisitive, being curious, that's important. I think the other thing that definitely comes to mind is you're going to be working with lots of different groups of people. And, we talk at Facebook about working cross-functionally. So you can't achieve, your job, your role, your mission on your own. You have to work with lots of groups, with lots of different people. Often you have, different objectives, different mindsets. And I think that's something that, we're very good at in the military, because we all come, as Lisa said, we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences. But being able to understand, to show empathy, being able to work, productively with a very disparate and different group of people to get the job done is going to be really important. And that's something I think as veterans we're very good at.
What are the biggest misconceptions, do you think, exist in the workplace about veterans and the skill sets that they have?
Well, I think we've come a long way from the mad, bad, sad rhetoric. I really do. I think that we've advanced incredibly. I think there is though still a perception, and as I alluded to it earlier, that anyone who's served in the military is almost like one little package, and so you immediately know what that package is going to be, what it's going to look like, how it's going to react, what it's going to do, because somebody's got military on their CV. And that's just, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, we're three very different people sat here. We've all got very different experiences. We've all got very different backgrounds, and we're all doing very different things now. So it's trying to get that message over to hiring managers, because it's them who the CV lands. That's where your CV lands, and they have got to be the ones that are able to think, laterally about, okay, it's got military on that CV, but that doesn't actually explain what this person brings to the party, and it doesn't tell me who they are. And that's the bit we've really got to keep working at and trying to keep developing.
How do we do that? It's
about education, Kate, I think. And I think, all of us in this space who want to give back, who want to help people progress. And, I know Facebook have got a very strong military network. Barclays have got a very strong military network. It's about trying to educate our colleagues, especially those in the HR, about what does it mean when you have military on your CV.
What does it mean to you when you have applications to your company from veterans?
So, and again, I'm one as a veteran, but two, of course, not just working alongside people in my company who are veterans, but also many other partners that we have and many other organisations that we have. Of course, I'm a huge fan of veterans, but I'm a huge fan of veterans that are good, is the truth. The reality is that just because somebody is a veteran, I don't believe will make them naturally good for every single role or every single thing. And of course, I don't think that everything is right for everybody, which I think goes without saying. But I think it's worth saying because actually, I do think there are some things we do want people to understand about most veterans. So there's a really high chance that if you take somebody above a certain period of time in the military, not even necessarily rank, they have had a number of things invested in them. Leadership might be one example of that. Resilience, and indeed focus on robustness and focus on agile thinking, or maybe even design and systems thinking, depending on what they were doing before. So there's certain things that you can kind of shortcuts to take, but then you still need to dig a little bit below to make sure that individual that's stood in front of you actually meets that requirement. And so for me, I think that that's what I would really be looking at when I get a military application.
So what's related to both of you then what's the question that an employer should be asked? They get the CV, they get the person in front of them, they put the CV down. What questions should they then ask to elicit that information that you've just said they need to have, Lisa?
So I would say, what is the value this individual can bring to the business? What is your value add?
Do you think they will know the answer to that question, given that we've just spoken about the translation of skills and how actually there's some sort of disconnect there?
I'd like to think, Kate, there are enough opportunities for veterans and service leavers coming out to attend workshops, management sessions, webinars. You didn't even have to turn up to an event now. It's all online.
So they should know their value add.
They should know their value add. And again, it goes back to that due diligence piece. The individual who is seeking a role has to try and establish what they want to do, and when they apply for a job, they should turn up prepared for that job and that job interview, just like every other member of society. And you wouldn't expect someone, from another bank to come to Barclays and not know what their value add is. And I would say the onus is on the veteran to do exactly the same. And it goes down to being prepared and being the right person for the role.
I definitely recognise that there's, of course, sometimes a challenge because of the translation aspect. If you said to me as a former paratrooper, what's my value add? If I take a relatively junior private in the parachute regiment, what's my value add in this context? I might be able to rattle that off really quickly. But then when asking me to understand or explain my value add in a very different context, thinking about joining a bank, thinking about joining a software company, it might be more challenging. But that comes to the point that you're making, which is about preparation and help. And asking for help is not, there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. There's lots of it out there. It may not be really obvious to you on day one, but that's what the help's for. So just reach out for the help, whether that's directly to the types of organisations you're interested in, or of course with the Career Transition Partnership Network. There's so many different places to turn. And I think sometimes we, because it's not always immediately obvious on day one, we assume that it's really quite challenging. But actually sometimes it's a bit of a process. just takes a bit of time.
Yeah, and I love that question. And actually, so what's your value add is actually saying, what are you good at? That's it, isn't it? What are you good at?
Absolutely.
And coming back to your point, what do you enjoy? Because actually, if we enjoy something, we're going to be good at it because we'll apply ourselves. It comes down to that, does it? Is it that?
I think so. I think it, they say that, your strengths are your passions. So I think if you understand that, if you can spend the time, I suppose, really understanding yourself and thinking about this reinvention. So of course, you're going to look back at your service and think, okay, what are the things that I've learned? What are the experiences that I've had? What have those things given me? But I think you've also got to think about this, get into this reinvention mindset and say, what is it I want to do next? What is it I love? What is it I care about? What am I passionate about? And then, to Lisa's point, you can build that kind of value add from that. So I think that's definitely one thing. I think the second thing is about really understanding the company or the industry or the sector that you want to go into, because I know that the first stage in the process to join Facebook is a telephone interview with a recruiter, and they will expect you to know something about the company. So why do you want to join Facebook? And they're very good at kind of filtering that and saying, well, is this something that are they genuinely interested in working for the company, and why are they passionate about it? So I think there's definitely preparation that needs to be done and can be done, and as Oz and Lisa both said, there's a fantastic network of veterans working in lots of different sectors that are willing to to share their experiences and to give kind of tips to help people prepare.
So if I was thinking about applying to Facebook or Barclays or CyberSafe, might I then look, and also we've spoken about it, the companies that have signed up to the covenant, and so I could look and think, right, actually Facebook will have a veterans association within it, and reach out within.
Yeah.
Find a way of, finding somebody within and just saying, I understand you, so as you say, doing your due diligence before you begin, finding a veteran-friendly company, as it were, at least is a good first step. As we bring it to a close then, what's the one message that you would like to sort of deliver to an employer who might be listening, and also to a veteran who is listening? What would be your takeaway thoughts?
So I think for a veteran, it would be, don't be frightened of reinvention, embrace it, because actually it's incredibly liberating, incredibly kind of powerful, to actually go through that process. It can be very positive. So that would definitely be my message to veterans. I think for employers, it's take the time to really understand what, who veterans are, what we bring, and the difference that we can make to a company. And I think I mentioned to you, Kate, I had my one conversation with Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook a couple of weeks ago. I had to get that in. My only conversation in 5 years. But what was really kind of wonderful was the fact that she really wanted to understand the stories, and it was very clear to her from that what veterans bring to Facebook as an organisation. And for somebody that is essentially number two in the company, to recognise that, that was a pretty powerful thing. So I think we need more employers to kind of, really help understand who the veterans are within the organisation, what they bring, and ultimately how can we bring more talent into the organisation.
Nice, thank you.
I think for me, the message to veterans would be to not hold back. In fact, to go above and beyond. The challenge in the civilian employment space is that lots of people want great jobs, and lots of organisations are looking for great people. And you will have to go out of your way to demonstrate that. Don't be afraid of that. Don't shy away from it. Lean into it. You are more than adequately prepared. And if you want it bad enough, show that. Do the work, turn up fully prepared, and enjoy the process. and learn from it. And don't take knockbacks as failure, take knockbacks as learning, as you would do in anything else, as we've done all the way through your military career. So that would be my message to the veteran community. Lean into it. To employers, I would say, not just open your minds, but embrace the opportunity that exists, which is to make your life easier. If you're looking for certain things, as a shortcut to just find those areas. If you're looking for people who are resilient, robust, like a challenge, willing to turn their hands to lots of different things, competent and able to manage different types of tasks and different types of roles, maybe have a leadership invested in them in a way that you probably aren't going to be able to do, then the veteran community presents an opportunity, a place to start to look, but not every single veteran will be right for you. So don't discount the community, the opposite. Just put them in the pool of people to consider and truly consider them.
I wish I'd gone first now, Kate. So I think to the business, along very similar lines, as I think if the last sort of 14 months has told us anything, is that businesses need a certain type of person to lead them through crises. And I think we'd all be very short-sighted if we thought this pandemic was the only thing that was going to throw, a mountain in the way of, moving forward. So what type of person are you looking for? And I think the last period has shown us it's people who are resilient, people who can lead in a crisis, people who can slot into a team and make decisions and, and take ownership of those decisions. And I think if you identify and can articulate what skills you are looking for within your business, and this is across all sectors, that very much leads you to the veteran community. Those are our transferable skills. Those are the things that we can bring. That's our value add. So that's what I would say to the businesses. To the veterans, and something we haven't really touched on is one, obviously do your due diligence, but also understand that company, do your homework on the company, and are you the right cultural fit for that company? Because you're not going to fit everywhere, and not everyone will suit every company, and we've mentioned this a few times. So do look at the company. Is it a cultural fit for you? And if it is, then progress. But if it's not, then don't be afraid to park an opportunity. Just because there's a job there, it might not be the right opportunity for you. And I think it's far more important to land the right job than any job.
Thank you so much to my guests today, Lisa Marr, Oz Alashe and Andy Mylop. In our next episode, we look at the extraordinary quality of resilience. I hope you'll join me then on Veterans Work, the podcast. Bye-bye.